The highway split open on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my long shifts. 12 hours of asphalt repair and lane closures on the I-70 corridor west of Denver. The kind of work nobody thanks you for until the road crumbles under their tires. My name is Denny Bocanegra. I was 34, a foreman for CDOT District 6 Highway Maintenance. And I had spent the last 11 years of my life keeping Colorado's arteries from bleeding out. I knew every crack, every patch, every hairline stress fracture between Silverthorne and the Eisenhower Tunnel. I knew how concrete talks if you listen, how it groans before it gives, how rebar sings a certain pitch when the subsurface erodes beneath it. I didn't know any of that mattered until the morning the westbound lanes near Floyd Hill buckled upward like a broken rib and revealed something underneath that had no business existing. We'd been doing emergency patching since the weekend. The outbreak was 5 days old by then, though nobody was calling it an outbreak yet. The governor's office was still using the word disturbance. The National Guard had rolled through Denver on Saturday in a convoy that looked rehearsed, which should have scared us more than it did. My crew was down to 4 guys. Rodriguez hadn't shown up since Thursday. Kessler's wife called Monday morning to say he was sick, and the way she said sick, whispering it, like the word might bite, told me everything the news wasn't saying. That left me, Danny Tsao, Pete Villanueva, and a 22-year-old apprentice named Maya Cortland, who had been with us only 6 weeks and already proved herself tougher than half the veterans I'd ever supervised. We were filling a sinkhole at mile marker 247. The road had been deteriorating fast, faster than weather or load stress could explain. And district engineering blamed it on a ruptured culvert nobody could locate on the original plans. The vibration started at 6:40 a.m. I felt it in the soles of my boots first, then in my kneecaps, then in my chest. Pete looked at me from across the open lane, and his mouth formed a word I couldn't hear because the asphalt was already screaming. A 40-foot section of westbound highway heaved upward in a slow, grinding arc. Not a sinkhole collapse, an eruption. The subsurface pushed the road up from beneath, splitting the lanes apart like tearing bread. Maya grabbed the door of the service truck and held on. Tsao dropped a traffic cone and ran toward me without thinking, which was the kind of instinct that made him irreplaceable. Dust poured upward from the fracture. Inside the wound, beneath 6 inches of asphalt and 8 inches of reinforced concrete, I could see something that wasn't earth or gravel or drainage pipe. It was a steel wall, painted gray, smooth, institutional. There were bolt patterns visible along a seam, heavy structural fasteners, the kind you see in military engineering. The wall descended into darkness at an angle that suggested a buried structure of considerable depth. None of us spoke for a long moment. "Denny," Tsao said, "that's not a culvert." It wasn't. I'd seen utility vaults, storm shelters, Cold War-era civil defense bunkers repurposed as cable relay stations. This was none of those things. The steel was modern. The bolt pattern was standardized, but unfamiliar. And when I crouched at the edge of the fracture and swept dust away from the surface, I found stenciled markings in faded yellow paint. USA MRIID-4/subsurface module 7/authorized personnel only/biocontainment level 3. I didn't know what USA MRIID-4 meant then. I'd learn later. In that moment, all I knew was that someone had built a biocontainment facility under a highway I'd maintained for over a decade. And neither I nor anyone in my chain of command had ever been told. The dust settled. The 4 of us stood at the edge and stared down into the crack. The morning sun cut across the exposed steel at an angle that turned it into a mirror. And in the reflection, I could see the mountains behind us, and the empty highway stretching east toward a city that was already beginning to die. We should have reported it immediately. Protocol was clear. Structural anomaly. Call district, call state patrol, flag the corridor, go home. But the phones had been unreliable since Sunday. Cell towers in the foothills were dropping calls every few minutes, and the CDOT radio repeater on Squaw Mountain had gone silent overnight. Pete tried dispatch 3 times and got static laced with a single automated tone. The emergency alert system preamble, looping without a message body. That sound, a machine trying to warn us with no one left to type the warning, was the first thing that made my hands shake. Maya was the one who found the hatch. She'd climbed down into the fracture while the rest of us were still processing. That was Maya. 6 weeks on the crew, and she already moved like someone who trusted her own judgment more than anyone else's hesitation. She cleared rubble from a recessed panel on the steel wall and called up to us. Her voice echoed wrong, bouncing off surfaces that shouldn't have been there. "There's a door," she said. "Sealed, lever handle, recessed bolts. Denny, the bolts are thrown from the inside." I climbed down. The fracture was about 9 feet deep at its lowest point, and the steel wall extended further than the collapse had exposed. I could see the edge of the structure continuing in both directions beneath intact road surface. This thing was enormous. The hatch Maya found was industrial, 3 feet wide, 5 feet tall, set into the wall with a gasket seal that looked airtight. The lever handle was a heavy bar mechanism, the kind that locks with internal throw bolts. And when I examined the housing, I understood what she meant. The bolts extended outward from the door into the frame. They could only be engaged from the interior side. Someone inside this structure had sealed themselves in. Could be old, Tsao offered from above. Cold War era. Could have been locked for 50 years. "The paint's fresh," Maya said, running her finger along the stenciled markings. The yellow was bright. No UV degradation. No rust creep around the bolt housings. Pete's voice came from the road level, sharp with a quality I hadn't heard from him before. "Denny, we've got company." I climbed out. 2 figures were walking westbound on the highway shoulder, maybe 300 yards east. Walking wrong. The gait was disjointed. Not limping, not stumbling, but arrhythmic, as though the signals between brain and legs were arriving out of sequence. One of them wore what had been a paramedic's uniform. The other was shirtless, and even at that distance I could see the discoloration along his torso. Dark patches, not bruises, something subcutaneous and spreading. "That's them," Pete said quietly. That's what Kessler's wife was talking about. We'd all seen the footage by then. The cell phone videos from Aurora, from Lakewood, from the 16th Street Mall. Shaky, compressed, easy to dismiss as performance art or panic-driven misidentification. But standing on a broken highway watching 2 people approach with that unmistakable gait, the body moving, but the person gone, you don't dismiss anything. You recalibrate every assumption you've ever carried about what the world is. "Get below," I told my crew. "Now." It wasn't a decision I made with logic. It was geometry. We were exposed on an open highway with no vehicles running, no traffic cover, no weapons except the hand tools in the maintenance truck. Below us was a steel-walled structure with a sealed door. The infected were between us and our truck. The math was primitive and absolute. We dropped into the fracture. All 4 of us, huddled against the buried steel wall like animals sheltering against a cliff face. Above us, the footsteps grew louder. That arrhythmic scraping, shoe leather dragging across asphalt in patterns that mocked walking. They passed directly over the fracture. One of them paused. I could hear breathing. Wet, labored, mechanical, as though the lungs were still working, but the brain had forgotten the rhythm and was running the process manually. Maya pressed her back against the hatch. It shifted, not much, a centimeter. The gasket seal exhaled a whisper of cold, stale, chemically treated air. The door wasn't fully locked. I held up a hand. Nobody moved. Above us, the infected figure stood at the fracture's edge for 11 seconds. I counted, because counting was the only thing keeping my nervous system from detonating. And then the dragging footsteps resumed and faded westbound. The other one had never stopped. Whatever was driving them, it had a direction. They weren't hunting, not yet. Maya was already working the hatch. The throw bolts were engaged, but the housing had warped. Maybe from the road collapse, maybe from a subsurface settling. And the bottom bolt had partially retracted from its receiver. She gripped the lever handle and pulled. Metal ground against metal. The sound was obscene in the silence. "Easy," Tsao whispered. "I'm being easy," she whispered back, which was such a perfectly Maya response that despite everything, Pete almost smiled. The hatch opened inward with a groan that resonated through the buried structure like a struck bell. The air that rolled out was cold, not cool, cold, aggressively refrigerated, and carried a chemical undertone I recognized from the one time I'd toured a water treatment facility, chlorine dioxide, sterilization agent. Someone had been scrubbing this air. Beyond the hatch was a corridor, not a tunnel, a corridor with poured concrete floors, LED strip lighting along the ceiling that was still glowing at maybe 30% power, and walls lined with cable conduit and labeled junction boxes. The labels were Federal Standard Format. Department of Defense alphanumeric. This was not a relic. This was active infrastructure, built within the last decade, powered by something still running. "We're going in," I said. "We don't know what's inside," Pete countered. "We know what's outside." That ended the discussion. I went first. Maya followed. Tsao came third, and Pete brought up the rear after pausing to pull the hatch closed behind us. The bottom bolt wouldn't re-engage due to the warped housing, but the door seated against its gasket, and the corridor's air pressure created a partial seal. The temperature dropped as we moved deeper. 40 feet in, the corridor turned 90 degrees and opened into a wider junction with 3 branching passages, each marked with colored floor stripes: red, blue, yellow, and directional placards. Red, containment wing. Clearance required. Blue, operations/C3. Authorized only. Yellow, habitation/life support. All personnel. Yellow, Maya said without hesitation. The habitation corridor descended a shallow ramp for another 60 feet and terminated at a pressure door. Heavier than the hatch, with a small observation window of layered glass. I looked through. A room. Maybe 30 by 40 feet. Cots arranged in rows. Supply pallets stacked along the far wall. A workstation with monitors, all dark. And on the floor, near the center of the room, a shape that took my brain several seconds to assemble into meaning. A person, sitting against a cot with their knees drawn up. Not moving, wearing a white lab coat over military fatigues. Their head was down, chin to chest, and for one terrible moment, I thought we'd found a corpse. Then the chest moved. A slow, deliberate breath. Alive. I knocked on the glass. The figure's head came up fast. Too fast, the way you move when you've been listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. A woman. Late 40s. Dark hair cut short, utilitarian. eyes that found mine through the glass and went wide with an expression I can only describe as horrified recognition. Not recognition of me, specifically. Recognition of what I represented. The outside. She crossed the room in 4 strides and pressed her palm flat against the glass. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear her through the pressure door. She pointed at the door mechanism, a wheel lock, like a submarine hatch, and shook her head violently. Then she held up her hands. On her left palm, written in black marker capital letters, the handwriting of someone who had prepared for the possibility of exactly this moment. Do not open this door. We locked it for a reason. Containment breached level 2. I stared at the words. Maya read them over my shoulder. Behind us, the corridor hummed with the breath of machines keeping this tomb alive. Level 2, Zhao said. There are 3 corridors. Red was containment. The woman behind the glass watched us arrive at the understanding she already carried. Her expression wasn't fear. It was grief. Her name was Dr. Lena Vojic. She told us through the glass, mouthing syllables slowly while Maya lip-read and translated. Serbian-born, naturalized citizen. Microbiologist. She had been assigned to this facility designated Subsurface Module 7 in a network she called the Underline. 14 months before the outbreak surfaced. 14 months of living beneath a highway I had personally resurfaced twice, driving my compactor over her ceiling while she studied something that would unmake the world. We communicated through the observation window for 20 minutes before she agreed to unseal a secondary intercom panel recessed into the wall beside the pressure door. The speaker crackled with decades-old static, but her voice came through clear enough. Controlled, precise. The voice of someone who had rehearsed calm until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. There were 11 of us, she said. Military liaison team of 4. Research staff of 6. 1 facility engineer. We sealed the primary hatch 9 days ago when the surface disturbance reports matched our predictive models. Your predictive models, I repeated. Module 7's primary research function was pathogenic mutation mapping. We studied theoretical vectors for engineered biological agents. How they might spread, how they might evolve, what they might do to neurological function in mammalian hosts. She paused. Theoretical. That was always the word in the briefings. Theoretical. Until it wasn't, Maya said. Dr. Vojic looked at Maya through the glass the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray that confirms the worst. Containment Level 2, the red corridor, housed our sample library. Inactive specimens, stored under cryogenic protocols. When we sealed the facility, we followed procedure. All samples verified inert. All seals confirmed. 7 days of nominal operation. Then on day 8, Dr. Pashkin noticed anomalous readings on the cryogenic monitoring board. Temperature drift in 2 storage units, not mechanical failure. The units were functioning perfectly. The samples were generating heat. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Biological activity, Zhao said from behind me, not as a question. Reactivation. Spontaneous. In specimens that had been verified inactive for 11 months. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands, visible through the glass, were gripping the edge of a cot frame with white knuckles. We initiated emergency sterilization of Level 2. UV flooding, chemical wash, atmosphere purge. Standard protocol. It should have worked. But someone went in, Pete said. Dr. Vojic closed her eyes. Sergeant Harlan Cole, military liaison. He insisted on visual confirmation before we reported to Underline Command. He entered Level 2 in full biosafety equipment. He was inside for 6 minutes. When he came back through the airlock, His suit was intact. His seals were intact. Every instrument read clean. She opened her eyes. 12 hours later, he attacked Dr. Pashkin in the mess area. No warning, no provocation. One moment, he was eating canned pears. The next moment, he was something else. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Through it, I could see the cots more clearly now. Several had been arranged as a barricade against the far wall. Behind that barricade, I could make out additional shapes. People, 2 of them, sleeping or resting. The others, the 8 who weren't accounted for by Dr. Wojcik or the 2 sleepers, were absent from the visible room. "Where are the rest of your people?" I asked. "Dr. Pashkin is dead. Sergeant Cole is in level 2. We managed to drive him back and seal the corridor. But the exposure..." She trailed off, reorganized her thoughts with visible effort. 3 more turned within 48 hours. They're in level 2 with Cole now, or what used to be Cole. That's 5 accounted for. You and 2 behind the barricade make 8. The other 3? Private Reeves locked himself in the engineering bay on day 9. He was showing early symptoms and chose isolation. We haven't heard from him since yesterday. She held up 2 fingers. Lieutenant Dow and Dr. Schiff went to secure the operations wing 36 hours ago. They haven't returned. The facility hummed around us, machines breathing for a body that was dying from the inside. "That door stays sealed," Dr. Wojcik said. "You need to leave this place." None of us moved toward the exit. It wasn't bravery. Standing in that corridor with LED strips casting their diminished glow across our faces, I could see the same calculus running behind each pair of eyes on my crew. Outside, open highway, no vehicles, infected presence confirmed. 30 miles of exposed mountain road between us and the nearest population center. Inside, steel walls, functioning life support, sealed doors, and a biocontainment nightmare slowly expanding through the facility's organs. Neither option was survivable in any conventional sense. The question was, which environment offered the most controllable set of problems? "We can't go back up," Maya said. Not to argue, but to state a fact, as she would read a pressure gauge. 2 on the highway means more coming. The herd patterns from the Denver footage showed directional clustering. If those 2 were moving west, there are dozens behind them. "She's right," Tsao confirmed. The footage from E70 East showed them following the road. They use infrastructure. Something about the flat surfaces keeps them oriented. Pete leaned against the corridor wall and crossed his arms. He was the oldest on the crew, 51, a grandfather twice over, and he had a way of going still when he was angry that I'd learned to read over 8 years of working beside him. He was still now. "So we're choosing between getting eaten up there and getting infected down here. There's a third option." I turned back to the intercom. "Dr. Wojcik, you said the operations wing. The blue corridor. That's where Lieutenant Dow and Dr. Schiff went?" "Yes." "What's in operations?" "Communications array. Situation monitoring. The facility's command and control systems. If any uplink to the underlying network is still functional, it would be there." "Could we reach the surface from operations? A different exit?" A pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried something new. Not hope, which would have been delusional, but a recalibration of possibility. "There's a ventilation shaft in the operations wing that connects to a surface exhaust port. It would be narrow. It was never designed for human transit. But physically, with the duct covers removed, a person could fit. Then we go to operations. Find Dow and Schiff if they're alive. Access communications. Find the shaft. You'd have to cross the central junction. The red corridor containment. intersects there. If the level 2 seal has degraded, if Cole or the others have found a way through, is there any indication the seal has failed? The monitoring systems in this wing went offline 18 hours ago. I have no data on level 2's current status. That was the answer I expected, and the one I least wanted to hear. 18 hours of blindness. Anything could have happened in that red corridor while the monitoring boards went dark. Sergeant Cole and his converted companions could be standing right behind the containment door. Or they could have found another route through the facility's connective tissue. Maintenance crawlways, utility chases, the paths that every building has, and every occupant forgets until something uses them. I looked at my crew. I'm not ordering anyone. This is volunteer only. Stop it, Denny, Maya said. We're going. Pete uncrossed his arms. The girl's right. Cut the speech. What's the plan? There was no plan. There was a direction and an objective and 300 feet of corridor between us and the operations wing, with an intersection that might contain the remnants of people who had been scientists and soldiers 72 hours ago. But I'd spent 11 years managing risk on roads where a single mistake could drop a mountainside onto a school bus. And I understood the fundamental architecture of danger. You don't eliminate it, you sequence it. You control the order in which bad things can happen. We move together. Tsao and I take point. Maya, you're on Dr. Voyich's intercom. Get us everything she knows about the layout between here and operations. Pete, find me anything in this corridor that works as a weapon. Conduit, pipe, fire extinguisher, anything with weight. Pete was already moving. Tsao positioned himself beside me. Maya keyed the intercom and began extracting facility schematics from Dr. Vojich with the efficiency of someone conducting a job site safety audit. I stared down the habitation corridor toward the junction where 3 colored lines diverged into the dark. Red, blue, yellow. We needed blue. I prayed red stayed closed. Dr. Vojich fed us everything she could. The facility's layout was deceptively simple on paper. A central junction connecting 3 wings in a modified Y configuration, with a habitation arm where we stood forming the southeastern branch, containment to the north, and operations to the southwest. In practice, the spaces between those clean lines were riddled with auxiliary systems, cable runs, HVAC plenums, a water reclamation loop, electrical distribution nodes. The building had veins and arteries beyond its corridors, and anything small enough or determined enough could navigate them. Maya sketched the layout on the back of a safety inspection form she'd pulled from her vest pocket. Her hands were steady. I noticed because mine weren't. The junction is 15 by 15, Dr. Vojich said through the intercom. Open area. The 3 corridor entrances are offset. You won't have line of sight to the red corridor until you're fully inside the junction. There's a fire suppression station on the west wall. The blue corridor entrance is immediately to the left of it. Any doors between the junction and the operations wing? 1 pressure door, 40 feet into the blue corridor. It should be unsecured. Dow and Schiff would have left it open behind them. Should be. I'm giving you what I have, Mr. Bocanegra. Everything after the junction is based on design specifications, not current observation. Pete returned with inventory. 2 lengths of steel conduit, each about 4 feet. Not ideal, but dense enough to matter. A fire extinguisher from a recessed wall cabinet. A multi-tool from Tsao's belt. Maya had her own contribution. A battery-powered reciprocating saw from the maintenance truck that she'd apparently carried into the fracture out of professional habit. It had a fresh demolition blade. In any other context, it would have been a tool. Down here, it was something more honest. We moved at 7:22 a.m. I know the time because Cao checked his watch and announced it the way he always did at the start of a shift. The normalcy of the gesture was so dissonant with our circumstances that it functioned as a kind of armor. We were still workers. We still clocked in. The habitation corridor was 80 feet from the pressure door to the junction. The LED strips continued at reduced power, throwing enough light to see clearly but casting shadows that moved as we moved, creating the persistent illusion of company. Our footsteps on the concrete floor produced a flat, institutional echo. Somewhere behind the walls, machinery cycled in rhythmic pulses. The life support system performing its automated duties for an audience that had largely ceased to require its services. At 60 feet, the air changed. The chlorine dioxide scent faded and was replaced by something organic and sour, like wet copper left in a closed room. Cao smelled it first. I saw his nostrils flare, saw his grip tighten on the conduit pipe, saw the precise instant his body transitioned from cautious to combat-ready. Not because he'd been trained for combat. He'd been trained to lay road base and operate a vibratory roller, but because the human animal carries ancient software that boots up when the environment trips certain sensors, and that smell was tripping every one of them. At 75 feet, I heard something from beyond the junction. Not footsteps. A sound like wet fabric being dragged across concrete. Intermittent. Directional. Coming from the north. From the red corridor. I held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Maya killed the reciprocating saw's standby light with her thumb. We stood in the diminished glow and listened to something move in the part of this facility that was supposed to be sealed. The dragging sound stopped. Then came a new sound. A single impact against a hard surface, followed by another, followed by silence. Not a knock, not a signal. The mechanical, repetitive collision of a body testing a boundary without understanding what a boundary was. Something in the containment corridor was pushing against its door. I looked at Cao. He looked at me. We had worked together for 7 years. We'd faced rock slides, flash floods, a tanker rollover that burned for 9 hours. We had a shared vocabulary for danger that didn't require speech. He nodded once. We entered the junction. The junction was exactly as Dr. Voyix described. 15 by 15 feet. Bare concrete, 3 corridor mouths arranged in an offset pattern that prevented simultaneous sight lines. The LED strips here were nearly dead, flickering at perhaps 10%. Casting staccato pulses of pale light that made the space feel like it was breathing. The fire suppression station on the west wall was intact. The blue corridor entrance gaped beside it, dark but passable. And to the north, the red corridor's pressure door stood closed. Closed, but not quiet. The impacts were louder here, rhythmic and brainless, delivered with a force that suggested mass rather than intention. Through the small observation window in the containment door, I could see nothing. The lights beyond were completely dead. But the glass vibrated with each impact, and I could hear a sound between the collisions that I will carry for the rest of my life. A vocalization. Not a moan, not a growl. Not any of the sounds the movies prepared us for. A hiccup, a broken, glottal repetition, like a damaged record skipping on a single syllable. The larynx still working, the brain no longer providing content. Move, I whispered. We crossed the junction in 4 seconds. Pete went first, his bulk filling the blue corridor entrance like a cork, shielding the rest of us from whatever lurked behind that red door. Cao followed, then Maya, then me, walking backward with the fire extinguisher clutched against my chest, watching the containment door shudder with each impact. The blue corridor was longer than the habitation wing. The floor stripe guided us forward through darkness that the failing LEDs could barely contest. 20 feet in, we passed an open utility closet. Electrical panels, relay switches, a charging station for handheld equipment. 40 feet in, we reached the pressure door Dr. Wojcik had mentioned. It was open, not propped open, opened mechanically from this side. The wheel lock had been turned to its full disengaged position. Dow and Schiff had come through here. Beyond the pressure door, the corridor widened, and the ceiling rose to accommodate overhead cable trays and a large ventilation duct that ran the length of the passage. The duct was square, approximately 30 inches across. The surface exhaust shaft. Our exit, if we could reach it, and if it went where Dr. Wojcik believed. Sal pointed. Ahead, at the corridor's terminus, a faint glow bled around the edges of a final door. Not a pressure seal, an ordinary interior door, slightly ajar. The operations wing. Something inside was still powered. A screen, a console, an indicator light. Something alive in the electronic sense, if not the biological one. I pushed the door open with the base of the fire extinguisher. The room beyond was a command center. Not large, maybe 20 by 25 feet, but dense with equipment. Console banks lined 3 walls. A central table held laminated maps, binders, communication logs. 2 chairs were overturned. A coffee mug lay shattered on the floor beside a brown stain that could have been coffee and could have been something else. The overhead lights were dead, but 3 monitors on the far console still glowed with dim blue standby screens, and a single red LED on a radio stack pulsed with patient rhythm. "Dow?" Pete called softly into the room. "Schiff, Lieutenant Dow?" No answer. But the room had a second door on the far wall, marked COM/secure. It was closed, locked, from the look of the keypad beside it. Maya moved to the active console and began reading. Her face cycled through expressions that I tracked like weather. Confusion, focus, comprehension, dread. She beckoned me over without looking away from the screen. The monitor displayed a facility status dashboard. Most indicators were red or gray. Offline, failed, compromised. But one section was still reporting. Internal atmospheric sensors. The data showed air composition readings for each wing of the facility. Habitation, nominal. Operations, nominal. Containment. The readings were not nominal. Oxygen levels were depressed. Carbon dioxide was elevated. Ammonia compounds were present at concentrations that indicated biological decomposition. And the containment wing's internal pressure was higher than the corridor outside it. The air was pushing outward. The seals were holding, but the differential was increasing. The facility was exhaling something that used to be people. "How long before the seals fail?" I asked Maya. Because she was the one reading the data, and because I had learned in 6 weeks that her engineering instincts were sharper than people with decades more experience. Depends on the gasket material and the pressure rate. These readings show a slow climb. 0.2 pounds per square inch per hour increase in containment overpressure. If the corridor seals are rated for standard biocontainment differentials, maybe 5 pounds per square inch max? That gives us, she calculated silently, 25 hours from the last calibration timestamp. Timestamp is 19 hours old. 6 hours, Tsao said. Maybe 6 hours. The room contracted around that number. 6 hours before the containment corridor's atmosphere, carrying whatever aerosolized remnants of the reactivated pathogen had been brewing in there, began seeping through degraded gaskets and into the central junction, into the air we were breathing. Pete sat down heavily in one of the upright chairs, not from exhaustion, from the specific gravity of understanding. We find that ventilation shaft, and we go. Now, Forget communications, forget Dow and Schiff. We're not leaving anyone behind. The words were out of my mouth before I decided to say them, and they surprised me because I'd never been that person. I was a logistics pragmatist. I built schedules, managed crews, calculated material loads. Heroism was a budget line I'd never funded. Denny. Pete's voice was careful, the way you talk to someone standing near an edge. We don't know these people. We know they came this direction and didn't come back. The secured door with the keypad drew my attention again. If Dow and Schiff had accessed the communications room, they might still be inside. I approached the keypad and examined it. Standard 10-digit with a card reader. No card, no code. But the door frame showed tool marks near the latch. Someone had tried to pry it and failed. They couldn't get in, Maya observed. Wherever they went after that, it wasn't through this door, which left the operations wing itself. I scanned the room more carefully. The overturned chairs, the broken mug, the stain on the floor, and something I'd missed on first entry. A ceiling tile displaced above the central table. Pushed up, not fallen down. The gap revealed the dark rectangular mouth of the utility plenum above the drop ceiling. Someone had gone up. "Dow?" I called toward the ceiling. My voice sounded foreign in the dead air. "Lieutenant Dow. Dr. Schiff. We're civilians. Highway maintenance crew. We came in through the surface breach." Silence. Then, from somewhere above and to the left. Not directly overhead, but displaced, as if the sound had traveled through ductwork. A voice. Male, strained, speaking at the volume of someone who has learned that sound attracts things. "How many?" "4. Are you armed?" Hand tools, fire extinguisher. A pause. Then, with the exhausted precision of a military officer who has processed too much. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent us. The road collapsed. We found the hatch." I kept my voice level. "Are you Lieutenant Dow?" "Dow is dead." The word landed like a stone in a well. I heard Maya's breath catch. Cao shifted his weight, the conduit pipe rotating slowly in his hands. "Dr. Schiff." "I'm Schiff." The voice moved. I tracked it through the ceiling. He was crawling, approaching the displaced tile from the plenum space. "Don't look up. I need to see you first." We waited. A face appeared in the gap. Gaunt, male, maybe mid-30s, with wire-rimmed glasses that sat crooked on a nose that had recently been broken. His lab coat was torn at the collar and streaked with something dark. He studied us with the frantic computational intensity of a man running a threat assessment on inadequate data. "You're road workers," he said. Not a question. He was reading our high-visibility vests, our steel-toed boots, the CDOT patches on Cao's jacket. "Highway maintenance," I confirmed. "What happened to Dow?" Schiff's face performed a complicated series of expressions, settling on a blankness that was itself a kind of communication. "He opened a door he shouldn't have. There's a reason the locks in this place are set from the inside, mister?" "Boca Negra. Denny." "There's a reason, Denny. Every door in this facility that's locked, it's locked by the people on the inside, to keep themselves away from what's on the other side. This isn't a bunker. It's a series of quarantine chambers. And we're running out of chambers." Schiff came down from the ceiling with the careful movements of someone managing injuries he hadn't disclosed. When his feet touched the console table, his left knee buckled, and he caught himself against a monitor bank. Pete steadied him. Under the operations wing's residual light, the damage was visible. The broken nose, a laceration along his jaw held closed with butterfly bandages he'd improvised from medical tape. bruising on both forearms, consistent with defensive positioning. Whatever had happened to Dow had happened in proximity to Schiff. He didn't sit. He leaned against the console and spoke with the compressed efficiency of a debrief. Dow and I reached operations 36 hours ago. Primary objective was communication. We needed to reach the underlying network and transmit a containment failure report. The comm room is behind that locked door. Neither of us had the access code. It was changed by Sergeant Cole before he turned, and Cole's access terminal was in level 2. So the communications are behind a locked door, the code's with an infected person in a sealed containment corridor, and the seals are failing, Maya summarized. Perfect. The comms aren't our exit, I said. The ventilation shaft is. Dr. Wojcik mentioned a surface exhaust. The ventilation shaft connects to the surface, yes. Exhaust port opens approximately 200 meters north-northwest of the highway, in a drainage culvert disguised as a utility access point. Schiff adjusted his glasses. I was planning to use it myself. But there are 2 problems. First, the shaft passes through the containment wing's plenum space. There's a fire damper at the boundary. If it's closed, you're not getting through without cutting equipment. Maya raised the reciprocating saw. Schiff's eyebrows lifted fractionally. Road crew, she said. Apparently. He continued. Second problem. When Dow and I attempted to access the comm room, we split up. I stayed here to work on the keypad. He went to check the shaft route from the operations side. The access panel is in the corridor, about 30 feet back the way you came. He opened the panel, climbed in, and 40 seconds later, I heard him scream. Not a surprise scream, a recognition scream. He met something in the ductwork. The room processed this. Every face recalculated. The ductwork was the same ductwork that ran through the entire facility. The same system that connected all 3 wings through a plenum space that no containment door sealed. The red corridor's biological seal controlled the corridor. It did not control the building's respiratory system. The damper, I said. The fire damper between the shaft and containment. You said if it's closed. Is there a way to verify? Schiff pointed at the console Maya had been reading. The facility management system should show damper positions, if it's still reporting. Maya was already working. Her fingers moved across the interface with the confidence of someone who understood systems, regardless of their purpose. HVAC controls bore the same logic as road construction equipment controllers. She navigated menus, expanded submenus, found a schematic view of the ventilation network. The display was partially corrupted, gray sections indicating sensors that had gone offline. But the shaft route from operations to the surface was visible. 3 dampers along the route. The first, between operations and the central plenum, shown open. The second, at the containment wing boundary, shown closed. The third, at the surface exhaust port, shown open. Containment damper is closed, Maya reported. Fire protocol. It would have tripped automatically when the containment wing's atmospheric readings went off nominal. Can we open it from here? The override requires... She paused, read further, and the quality of her silence changed. The override requires the same access code as the comm room. Cole's code. Every path in this facility led back to the same locked gate. Every solution required a key that was currently in the possession of a man whose neurological architecture had been replaced by something that a building's own scientists had created. The facility wasn't just a series of quarantine chambers. It was a puzzle box designed by people who hadn't anticipated being inside it when it closed. There's a manual release, Schiff said quietly. On the damper itself, physical lever, accessible from inside the ductwork. On the containment side, Tsao said. On the containment side. The argument lasted 12 minutes. I know because Tsao checked his watch when it started and again when it ended, and because Maya later told me she'd been counting seconds inside the minutes to keep herself from screaming. Pete wanted to leave through the fracture we'd entered. Go back up, take the highway on foot, move at night, take our chances with the open road. The math had changed, he argued. The facility was compromised from the inside. The threat wasn't approaching from the surface. It was already here, circulating through ductwork and building pressure behind failing gaskets. Going deeper was going toward the infection, not away from it. Schiff countered with surface intelligence he'd gathered before the monitoring systems died. The highway corridor between Floyd Hill and Idaho Springs had been flagged in the last underlined dispatch. 72 hours old, as a primary migration vector. The infected were following I-70 westbound in numbers that the dispatch had estimated in the low thousands. Whatever Pete had seen from the fracture, 2 figures on the shoulder, was the leading edge of a mass that would make the highway impassable within hours, if it hadn't already. We go through the duct, I said. We reach the containment boundary damper, open it manually, continue through to the surface exhaust. Through the containment plenum, Pete said. Through the airspace above the wing where your turned soldiers are beating against doors and the pathogen is measurably present in the atmosphere. The ductwork is sealed from the occupied spaces below. The plenum runs above the drop ceiling. If the duct integrity is maintained, we'd be in an enclosed metal channel, separated from the containment wing's air by the duct walls themselves. And if the duct integrity isn't maintained, if there's a breach, a joint failure, then we hold our breath and move fast. Pete stared at me. I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not surrender, not agreement, but the particular resignation of a man who has evaluated every option and found them all deficient in the same way. He wasn't yielding to my plan. He was acknowledging that no plan survived contact with this environment, and that movement, in any direction, was preferable to waiting for the seals to fail and the air to turn poisonous around us. I'll go first, Maya said. No. I'm the smallest. I move fastest in tight spaces. I have the saw. She held it up, compact, battery-powered, with a demolition blade that could cut through light-gauge sheet metal in seconds. If there's an obstruction, I clear it. If there's a problem, I'm the one most likely to be able to reverse in a 30-inch duct. She was right, and I hated that she was right. I go second, I said. Schiff third, Pete fourth, Tsao at the rear. We need to address something first. Schiff's voice carried the clinical weight of a man accustomed to delivering information that altered outcomes. Dao entered that ductwork and encountered something. We don't know what. If the containment wings infected have accessed the plenum space through a ceiling breach below, they could be in the duct system. Could they navigate it? Tsao asked. The ductwork is tight. They'd have to crawl. Crawling requires coordinated limb movement. The converted retain motor function. Diminished, disorganized, but functional. They can climb stairs. They can open lever handles. Crawling is within their capability range. Maya absorbed this without visible reaction. She checked the saw's battery indicator, confirmed a full charge, and made a brief adjustment to the blade tension. Then we'll hear them before we see them. Metal duct, enclosed space. Any movement ahead of us will transmit. She was thinking like an engineer. The duct was an acoustic environment as much as a physical one. Sound would travel through it with minimal loss. If something was ahead of us, we would hear it. If something was behind us, we would hear it. The duct would be our early warning system and our cage simultaneously. One more thing, Schiff said. He reached into his lab coat and produced a small LED pen light. Dao had the other one. One light. 5 people. 300 feet of ductwork through the dark heart of a government biocontainment facility. We moved to the access panel. The access panel was exactly where Schiff described. Recessed into the corridor wall 30 feet back toward the junction, marked with a yellow maintenance placard. Maya removed the cover with the multi-tool screwdriver head. The duct mouth was square, black, and breathed cold air outward against our faces, with a mechanical steadiness that suggested the ventilation system was still cycling, still moving air, still connecting every part of this facility to every other part through channels no containment door controlled. Maya went in head first, the pen light clamped between her teeth, the reciprocating saw held against her chest. I watched her high-visibility vest shrink into the dark until only the reflective strips caught the corridor light. Then she was gone, and the duct swallowed her completely. I followed. The metal was cold against my palms and knees. The space was tight but navigable. 30 inches meant my shoulders brushed the sides but didn't wedge. Behind me, I heard Schiff enter. Then Pete's heavier frame compressing the duct with audible protest. Then Sowell sealing the rear. 5 bodies in a metal tube. The sound of our combined breathing created a low, rhythmic drone that blended with the ventilation system's hum until I couldn't distinguish between mechanical and biological air movement. Maya's pen light was a pale dot ahead of me, bobbing with her crawl rhythm. The duct ran straight for approximately 50 feet, then angled upward at a gentle slope. We were ascending into the plenum space above the drop ceiling. The angle wasn't steep, but it changed the crawling dynamics. Weight shifted backward. Knees became less useful than toes. I could hear Pete struggling behind Schiff, his larger frame fighting for traction on the smooth metal. At what I estimated was 70 feet, Maya stopped. Her light held steady. "Junction ahead," she whispered, and the duct carried her voice backward with perfect fidelity. The duct splits. Main branch continues forward. Secondary branch goes right. "Forward is the containment boundary," Schiff said from behind me. "The secondary branch feeds the habitation wing." "Forward," I confirmed. Maya moved. The junction was a simple T-fitting, and as we passed the secondary branch, I turned my head and looked into it. Darkness extended to infinity. But from somewhere deep in that darkness, carried on the ventilation current with terrible clarity, I heard the sound. The hiccup, that glottal, recursive vocalization I'd heard through the containment door. It was in the duct system, not close. The acoustic properties of the metal channel made distance estimation unreliable, but present. The infected weren't just in the red corridor below. They were in the spaces between spaces, navigating the building's hidden anatomy the way a virus navigates a body's lymphatic system. I said nothing. I crawled faster. At 100 feet, I was counting hand placements, roughly 18 inches each, doing the math to keep my mind operational. Maya stopped again. "Damper ahead. I can see the housing." A pause. "It's closed. Metal blade across the full duct cross-section. Manual release lever on the left side." "Can you reach it?" "Reaching now." The sound of her hand on metal, searching. Then a grunt of effort. "Lever stiff, really stiff. It hasn't been operated manually. Probably ever. Hold on." The sound of her straining against the mechanism filled the duct. Behind me, the others were silent, each managing their own claustrophobia and fear in private. The duct groaned as Maya applied force to the lever. Nothing moved. "I need leverage," she said. "The saw handle. I can use it as an extension on the lever arm." The sound of her repositioning in the tight space. Metal against metal. Then a sharp crack as the lever broke free from its corroded seat, followed by the heavy sliding grind of the fire damper retracting into its housing. Air rushed through the opened boundary with a pressure differential that I felt in my eardrums. New air, containment air. I held my breath instinctively, then forced myself to breathe. If the pathogen was airborne in these concentrations, holding my breath for the transit time was not physically possible. We were committed. "Open," Maya said, moving through. She crossed the boundary. I followed. We were now in the containment wing's plenum space, crawling through the airspace above the part of the facility where scientists had become specimens. The air on the other side of the damper was different. Not warmer, not colder, but textured, carrying particulates that I could feel on my lips and tongue. A mineral organic taste like licking a wet stone in a basement. The ventilation system was still circulating, still filtering, but whatever was happening in the containment wing below us was producing output that exceeded the filter's design parameters. I breathed shallowly and moved. Maya's light revealed duct walls streaked with condensation. Moisture was collecting on the metal surfaces, forming droplets that our knees and palms smeared into thin trails. The humidity was wrong. Schiff, crawling behind me, noticed it too. "Biological humidity," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "Metabolic output. They're generating heat and moisture." Below us, through the duct floor, I could hear them. Not the impacts against the corridor door. We were past that now, deeper into the containment wing. These sounds were subtler. Movement, shuffling, the rustle of fabric against concrete. And the hiccup. Multiple instances now, overlapping, a broken chorus of damaged vocal cords producing sound without speech. There were at least 4 of them down there. Cole, Pashkin, if he'd turned rather than died, and the 3 Doctor Wojcik had mentioned. The entire converted population of Module 7 congregated in the containment wing, existing in whatever state the reactivated pathogen had designed for them. The duct branched again. Maya consulted the schematic she'd memorized from the console display. Left branch continues to the surface exhaust, 90 feet to the exit port. 90 feet, 30 body lengths. 3 minutes of crawling at cautious speed. The number was small enough to create the illusion of proximity, and I felt something dangerous kindle in my chest. Relief. Premature, unsupported, structurally unsound relief. Then Maya's light found Dow. He was in the duct, 30 feet ahead of us, wedged at an angle where the shaft began its final upward incline toward the surface. He was face down, one arm extended forward and the other pinned beneath his body. He wore military fatigues, no lab coat. His head was turned to the side, and in Maya's penlight beam, his face was visible in profile. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, skin bearing the gray-blue pallor of oxygen deprivation. He was not breathing. Maya stopped. The light trembled once, then steadied. "Schiff," she said softly. "Is this Dow?" "I can't see from here," Schiff replied. "Describe the uniform." "Army combat pattern. Lieutenant's bar on the collar. Asian features, short hair, approximately 40. That's Dow." "He's not moving." "Is he turned?" The question hung in the duct like smoke. I could see Maya studying Dow's still form with the focused intensity of someone trying to detect movement at a scale below normal perception. A twitch, a tremor. The faintest rise of a chest that might indicate breathing or reactivation or the pathogen performing its terrible ignition sequence on another human nervous system. "I don't think he's anything," she said. "I think he's dead. The regular kind. The regular kind." As if death now required a modifier. As if the word alone was no longer sufficient because the thing it described had branched into categories. We go over him, I said, because there was no alternative. The duct didn't accommodate passing. Going back meant returning through the containment plenum to the operations wing and accepting the 6-hour SEAL failure timeline. Going forward meant climbing over the body of a soldier who had died, trying to do exactly what we were doing. Wait. Maya's light shifted. She was examining the duct surface around Dao's body. There's damage here. The duct wall is dented inward from the outside. Something hit it from below. And there's a gap, a seam separation where the impact bent the joint. She paused. I can see through it, down into the containment wing. Close the gap, I said immediately. I can't close it. It's structural deformation. The metal is bent. And Denny? Her voice changed, dropped half an octave, became the voice of someone delivering information that costs something to say. Something down there is looking up at it. I didn't ask her to describe what she saw. The information would not help me move faster, and moving faster was the only response that mattered. Go, I said. Over him, now. Maya went. She placed the penlight between her teeth again, gripped the duct walls, and lifted herself over Dao's body with the controlled precision of someone threading through rebar at a construction site. Her knees cleared his back, her boots passed over his legs. She was through and moving upward on the inclined section before I processed the sound I was hearing. A thin, wet clicking from below the damaged seam. Was not the ventilation system. My turn. I reached Dao and paused involuntarily. Up close, in the reflected glow of Maya's retreating light, I could see what had killed him. Not the infected, the duct itself. He had crawled into the incline section, encountered something. The gap, the face below it, and in his panic, had wedged himself at an angle that compressed his chest between the duct floor and the bend in the shaft. Positional asphyxia. He had been killed by geometry and fear. The realization carried a specific cruelty. The building hadn't needed teeth to destroy him. It just needed to be exactly the shape it was. I climbed over his body. The fabric of his uniform was cold and stiff. My hand pressed against his back for leverage, and the yielding quality of dead tissue transmitted through my palm with nauseating clarity. I moved through. Behind me, Schiff followed with a quietness that suggested he had found a place inside himself, where the physical reality of climbing over his dead colleague could be processed later or never. Pete came next. His larger frame made the maneuver agonizing. I heard metal protest, heard his breathing spike into short, controlled gasps, heard the sound of his vest snagging on the duct seam and tearing free. When he emerged on the incline side, he was breathing hard but moving. Cao was last. He reached Dao's position and stopped. From below the damaged seam, the clicking intensified. It was joined by the hiccup sound, closer now, directly below, produced by a throat that was inches from the gap in the duct wall. I heard Cao whisper something in Cantonese. Not a prayer, he told me later, but a line from a poem his grandmother used to recite when typhoons hit Guangzhou. Something about water knowing the way, even when people don't. He climbed over. The duct bucked once. An impact from below, a hand or a head striking the damaged section with force enough to widen the seam by another half-inch. Cao cleared Dao's body and scrambled up the incline on his forearms and toes, moving faster than any of us had moved since entering the shaft. The incline steepened. The air changed again. Warmer now, with a mineral freshness that didn't come from filtration systems. Real air. Surface air, seeping down through the exhaust port above us. I could smell pine, soil, rain-wet granite, the mountain, Colorado. the world that still existed above this concrete nightmare. Maya reached the exhaust port first. Her light revealed a metal grill secured with 4 bolts, standard hex heads. The multi-tool would work, but would be slow. She chose the saw instead. The blade's whine filled the duct with a sound so loud and so foreign to the silence we'd maintained that it felt like breaking a physical law. She cut through 2 of the bolt heads in seconds, bent the grill outward, and daylight. Actual daylight, gray and overcast but heartbreakingly real, poured into the shaft and hit our faces like warm water. She pulled herself through. I heard her boots crunch on gravel. Then her voice, from outside, from above, from the world. Clear. It's a culvert. We're in a drainage ditch about 50 meters from the highway. No movement visible. Come up. I climbed toward the light. My hands found the port's edge. Aluminum, sun-warmed, alive with the vibration of wind. I pulled myself through and felt rain on my face. Cold mountain rain. I knelt in the gravel and breathed air that no machine had processed. Pete emerged. Then Schiff. Then Sao, whose face, when it broke into the daylight, wore an expression of such savage, uncomplicated gratitude that I had to look away. We were on the north side of the highway, in a concrete-lined drainage culvert, partially concealed by scrub oak and service road grading. The exhaust port was disguised as a utility access point, exactly as Schiff had described. A nondescript metal cap in a concrete apron that no one would look at twice. The highway was visible through the trees, maybe 50 meters south. From here, I could see the road surface and what was on it. The 2 infected we'd seen that morning were no longer alone. The westbound lanes held a loose, staggering column of figures stretching east as far as visibility allowed. Hundreds of them, moving with that arrhythmic gait, following the road's trajectory through the mountain corridor like water following a channel. They were spaced irregularly, some in clusters of 3 or 4, others solitary, all moving west. Pete had been right about the leading edge. This was the body of the migration, and it was using Interstate 70 as a spinal cord. "We go north," I said. "Off-road, into the timber. We stay above the highway and parallel it until we reach the Idaho Springs interchange. There's a fire station there. Station 14. If anyone's organized a fallback, it would be there." "You're thinking like this is still a rescue," Schiff said. He was sitting on the culvert's edge with his damaged glasses in his hands, cleaning them on his torn lab coat with meditative thoroughness. "There's no fallback. The underlined dispatch I saw before comms died. The last one, 72 hours old, reported cascade failure in containment at 6 of 11 modules. 6. This facility wasn't unique. It wasn't an accident. The samples reactivated simultaneously across the network." I let that settle. Around us, the mountain did what mountains do, remained. Ponderosa pine stirred in a wind that carried nothing more dangerous than the smell of wet earth. A Steller's jay landed on a branch 10 feet away and studied us with the proprietary irritation of wildlife encountering humans in inconvenient places. The ordinary world was still operating, indifferent to the extraordinary thing happening on its roads and in its buried rooms. "Simultaneously," Maya repeated, "across facilities. That's not spontaneous reactivation. That's a trigger." "Yes," Schiff said. "That is a conclusion I've been trying very hard not to reach." Someone activated them. Someone sent a signal or introduced a catalyst or changed a condition that caused inert samples across 11 facilities to reactivate at the same time. Schiff put his glasses back on. They sat crooked on his broken nose and made him look, for one dissonant moment, like a disheveled professor arriving late to a lecture. The samples were stored under identical cryogenic protocols, networked monitoring, centralized environmental controls managed through the underline's command infrastructure. If someone with sufficient access altered the cryogenic parameters across the network, raised storage temperatures by even 2 degrees over a sustained period, the reactivation would appear spontaneous, simultaneous, unstoppable. Are you saying someone did this deliberately? Pete's voice carried a quality I'd never heard from him before. Not anger, not fear, but the sound of a worldview being restructured under load. I'm saying the locks on this facility were set from the inside, Mr. Villanueva. Every lock, every seal, every containment protocol, designed by the same people who created the thing being contained. And when a cage is built by the animal's keeper, you have to ask whether the cage was meant to hold or meant to open on schedule. Nobody responded. The jay flew away. Rain continued to fall in the thin, persistent manner of Colorado mountain weather, not committed to a storm, but unwilling to stop. On the highway below us, the column of infected continued its westward march, following a road I had maintained for 11 years, a road I now understood had been built on top of a weapon. I stood up. My crew stood with me. Schiff, who was not my crew but was now my responsibility, stood last. North, I said. Into the trees, away from the road. We figure out the rest while we move. We moved. We made Idaho Springs by nightfall. Station 14 was empty but intact, and its generator had fuel. We sealed the bay doors, found water, found canned food, found 4 walls that didn't hide anything beneath them. Schiff slept for 14 hours. Pete called his grandchildren on a landline that miraculously connected, spoke for 90 seconds before the line died, and sat afterward in a stillness that I recognized as a man storing something precious in a place nothing could reach. Maya took first watch without being asked. Tsao took second. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dr. Vojish, sealed behind her pressure door in the habitation wing, with the air turning toxic on a timer she couldn't stop. I kept thinking about Dow, wedged in a metal tube, killed by the shape of his own escape route. I kept thinking about the locks, set from the inside, every one, by people who built the cage and the creature inside it, and then, when the creature woke, discovered that the architecture of containment works in both directions. The walls that keep something in also keep you close to it. I don't maintain roads anymore. I don't think there are roads anymore. There are just paths that things follow. And the question is no longer where they lead, but what's underneath them.